Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Very good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Okay,
Good
hearty
morning,
welcome.
sir.
Okay, thank you. Hearty welcome
Good
to
morning,
all
sir.
participants
Thank you,
for
sir.
the 5-day workshop on competency-based learning. Dear friends, capacity to learn is a gift. Ability to learn is a skill. Willingness to learn is a choice. Once again, on behalf of the Director, Zonal Institute of Education and Training, Mumbai, and all the staff members of ZIET Mumbai, hearty welcome to all. Dear friends, learning is not a product of teaching. Learning is a product of activity of learners. Here we have arranged a competency-based workshop to help you because learning has taken a new dimensions. All of you may be facing it in the last few years. If you think you can do it, it is confidence. I think all of you are having confidence. But if you do it, then only it is competence. Therefore, with the able guidance of our director, sir, we already conducted this competency-based learning program for primary teachers. Now it is the time for trained graduate teachers. You are fortunate enough to be the master trainers from your region. We have taken one competency each per day so that we can elaborate it on that, and we are having some experts from Homi Baba Center and also from Tata Institute of Social Studies, and they will be helping you how these competencies can be enhanced among children through activities. Therefore, our humble request is please participate. As we know that learning is a product of activity of learners, we have planned for your participation also. Therefore, the lecture will be only for 1.5 hours in the morning. Then after that, it is your time only to sit back and relax and do the activities and then have the sharing of it with others. Now, once again, hearty welcome to all. Now, I request our Honorable Director, sir, to deliver the inauguration address. Over to sir.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
You might be wondering that competency is a term that we have been using extensively in the primary classes, and then where is it required for us in the middle school now? You see, when it comes to policy, there is nothing called middle school. We have only 3 stages in school education. One is the elementary education, second is the secondary education, third is the higher secondary or senior secondary education. So as per this policy nomenclature, elementary education can be further subdivided into 2 groups. One is called the primary education, in which classes 1 to 5 are included, and the other is called the upper primary part of the elementary education, which covers or includes classes 6 to 8. And therefore, whatever principles, whatever legal provisions that are applicable in the primary classes, they are equally applicable in the upper primary, namely classes 6 to 8. Keeping this in view, this program has been arranged for yet another reason, that the newly announced National Education Policy 2020 speaks about assessments of students at various levels to find out the efficiency of the system. Not to put labels on the students, not to put labels on the teachers, but to find out the efficiency of the system. And if there is any necessity to improve anything, how do we do it? And for that purpose, certain assessments would be done. And how these assessments are going to be done? These assessments are going to be done based on the previously defined learning outcomes. So, if assessment of students' progress is going to be made with reference to the learning outcomes that are already notified, then we as teachers have a requirement to ensure that our students, our learners do attain these learning outcomes. And only when they attain the learning outcomes, when an assessment is made, our students would turn out to be successful. And therefore, this program is not just to build the competence of the teachers, but then it is also to take care of the statutory requirement of the country. And therefore, dear friends, I request you to take part in these programs in these 5 days very proactively, so that not only your competency is built, but you are empowered to further build the competency in your fellow colleagues subsequently. You see, when we say that we have 5 different sessions on all these 5 different days, we are not going to speak about a specific competency. I'll come to the details of competency a little later in my presentation. But then what we are going to do is that we are going to speak about 5 different aspects of the process of teaching learning, through which we can achieve and ensure that our students do attain the learning outcomes. So it could be problem-based mathematics learning, it could be mathematical modeling, it could be productive assessments, it could be use of ICT. So we have 5 different focus themes. Using these focus themes, the teacher can ensure or design and build successful teaching learning transaction so that the learners attain the learning outcomes. That is the purpose of this 5 days workshop. So with this prelude, I move into the actual presentation. So this will cover 4 different issues. Why competency-based learning? What are the origins of competency-based learning? And what are the various forms of competency-based learning with a reference to mathematics? And what is competency-based learning for us that we intend to achieve in our classrooms? So first, why competency-based learning? You see, why do we want our students to learn? We need to know what is the end point. Only when we know the end point, only when we know the destination, and after we know the destination, we need to make a plan, and after we make the plan only we can start implementing. So knowing the destination and planning is what refers to the preparation before the commencement of a job. And that is the reason why we say, there is a common saying, a job well begun is half done. So therefore, we need to answer the question, why do we educate our youngsters? You see, commonly if you ask a teacher, if you ask a parent, why do you educate? Then people will say, I want my son or daughter to be enrolled in a college of engineering, in a college of medicine. I want him or her to become a chartered accountant and so on and so forth. But then that's a very narrow aim. The narrow aim is to help the individual to acquire the capability to perform a set of tasks or actions to lead a productive and joyful life. But then remember, even on a smaller scale, you can give examples like buying groceries, flying a plane, being a chartered accountant. These are examples I have picked out from the CBSE circular number 34 issued in the year 2020. I request each one of you to download this circular and carefully read the contents of this circular, because they have tremendous implications for the practice of all the teachers. But then more than this, there is a broad aim of education. The broad aim is to help the individuals fulfill the larger purpose of their lives. What is the larger purpose of a life? The larger purpose is not just in making a decent living, but then it is in contributing to the people around the individual in whatever form that excites the individual. So this is what, great personalities say. You take the case of Swami Vivekananda. He had a spiritual calling, and therefore he became a monk, and whatever enlightenment he had, he shared that wisdom with the masses. So therefore we also need to look into the broad aim, but in this competency based learning we would be focusing on the narrow aim of education. When it comes to education, we also speak about two components. One is teaching, the other is learning. What we do as teachers in the classroom is teaching, and what our students do is learning. And remember, we have a kind of a notion that learning normally takes place within the confines of the classroom, and that notion needs to be dismantled. Learning takes place everywhere, and classroom is a location or a space or place where the primary focus is on learning. But in other places, the primary focus may not be learning, but still learning can take place. Say you enter into a chit chat, and suddenly you find a topic of your interest popping up, and you get engrossed in that topic of your interest, and as you are engrossed in that, you also learn things related to that. And therefore, dear friends, learning can take place everywhere, but classroom is the place where the primary focus is on learning. And when we talk about teaching, we need to find out what is its connection with the learning. So primarily, there are two senses to the term teaching. One is the task sense, and the other is the achievement sense. Teaching as a set of tasks. So they include the processes of teaching or the curricular transactions. Now, if I ask you the question, what are the processes of teaching or curricular transactions? So we need to know what are the learning outcomes. We need to know what is the content. We need to know what are the resources that are required to be employed in the classroom as we teach, and we also need to have the resources, and then we need to do these transactions in the classroom. So teaching as a process of curricular transactions, a task sense. But then, for what do we do this? Supposing I look at your preparation by looking into the teacher's diary, I look into your learning aids or teaching aids, and then I also observe your classroom transaction. And can I conclude your teaching is successful? Yes, I can conclude your teaching to be successful or not, provided I am not bothered about the outcome or the product of teaching. What is the product of teaching? Students should have learned. If they have not learned, there is no achievement. And so the product of teaching is nothing but the attainment of learning outcomes. And therefore, how do you measure whether they have learned or not? And for which you need assessment. And that assessment should guide the planning and transaction. And therefore, the learning outcome is the expected achievement, and the learning outcome should guide your planning and transaction in the classroom. And you see, starting from the end point and then beginning your action is what is referred to as the washback effect. All your actions are focused on the end point, and therefore what is assessed strongly influences what is learned. You see, in the past, most of the questions that we ask in the classrooms used to be simple recall type questions, and therefore you frame a set of questions and give answers to those set of questions, make people learn answers to those set of questions. You have a larger set of say 50 or 100 odd questions taught in a span of 1 year, and then in the examination from that 100 or 50 odd questions, you ask only 5 or 10 questions and children have to answer. But then today, that is not considered to be sufficient. Rather, we have started introducing higher order thinking skill questions or hard questions for which students need to actually think, apply their mind, use their learning, and only then can they answer the questions. And therefore, if you take that into account, mere teacher-centered knowledge transfer is insufficient, and therefore we need to move from learner-centered competency-based learning. So our task is not to transfer or share what we know with the students, but to enable the learners to achieve or attain certain competencies so that they will become productive, successful citizens as they grow up. So this is the connect between teaching and learning. And where did it actually originate? The concept called outcome-based learning, the concept called competency-based learning came as a reaction to the Russian success of Sputnik. And the American society concluded that their educational system failed, and because of this failure only, Russia could supersede them in the race to space. But simultaneously, there was another movement going on in the United States, which was worried about the high dropout rate from the secondary schools, and also they found the graduates were not in a position to secure employment. And therefore, both these issues, when they were being processed for solutions, they came out with what is called as the outcome-based education. The debate and research thereafter ignited the development of outcome-based education. And remember, this theoretical orientation of the earlier OBE was towards behaviorism, and therefore the focus of the outcomes of education was on observable behaviors. And of course, the dropout rates and concerns of employment, they gave rise to the vocational education. And therefore, you need to think of two things. One is that competency, and the other is that the vocational capability of the individual. And if you read the National Education Policy 2020, you will find both these aspects appropriately built in. Now, in our context, our initial problem was quantity. The access of school-going children to the access of education to the school-going children in the primary stage was not 100%. So quantity was our first target. And once we showed remarkable progress and reached near 100% in quantity, then quality became a prime goal of education. And this has been the consistent focus of all government policies in the last few decades. And two of the remarkable examples are the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and RTE. You see, most of us might be familiar with one part of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, and that is providing facilities in the primary schools and ensuring the enrollment of children in the primary schools. But simultaneously, what was not noticed by people at large outside the education system is the efforts of the mission to enhance the quality of transactions in the primary classes. So lots of trainings were organized by the diets and ZIETs, and in KVS also we arranged lots of programs. So that clearly indicated that the prime goal of education has now moved from quantity to quality. Same way, RTE also has two dimensions. One dimension is age appropriate education to all the children in the age group of 6 to 14. But then in addition to this, there is a second one. The expected levels of learning needs to be achieved by all these students in the age group of 6 to 14. And the onus or responsibility of ensuring this achievement is with the system. In other words, is with the teacher. And therefore, the prime goal now consistently in the policy of the government is on quality. Then, when it becomes quality, it's a broad and vague term. So how do you measure quality? So the broad reference of quality is children learn the basics and get opportunities to acquire transferable skills to become global citizens. So as I said, after all, why do we educate our children? We educate our children so that they acquire certain competencies which are not only applicable in the classroom, they can also be applied to the life. That is why they are called transferable skills. And in order to ensure that they attain these transferable skills, we also need to set goals. the goals which are clear and measurable. And these goals which are clear and measurable, they are nothing but the learning outcomes. So the question is, are we not doing this? Teaching is actually meant to ensure learning. So are they something new what we are speaking about? Have they not been done in the past? The answer is a mixed yes and no. Why? For majority of the teachers, textbooks are the curriculum. And what is the outcome of a transaction of teaching in the classroom? The outcome is the students should have the ability to answer the questions given at the end of the lesson. But then that's insufficient, and that is why we need to move beyond. And how did we move beyond? In the year 1992, minimum levels of learning in the form of competencies were developed and notified by NCERT. But then they were highly characterized by the product-oriented approach. You see, education can be viewed as a process. Education also can be viewed as a product. And these approaches, they primarily focused on the product-oriented approach. As a result, the MLLs had limited scope to assess the overall development of the children. So, a decisive shift came. What was the decisive shift? That decisive shift came with the NCF 2005, where the child's capacity to construct knowledge as a natural learner became central to the curricular transaction. And remember, once child's capacity as a natural learner to construct knowledge is recognized, only then the teacher takes the role of a facilitator. Without understanding this, if you say that I am a teacher as a facilitator, and still we keep on spoon feeding everything, still we keep on deciding this is what the questions are, these are the answers that you have to give to the questions, then the teachers are no longer facilitators, they are just transmitters and transferers of knowledge only. And therefore, if you recognize that the child's natural capacity to learn, then what is knowledge? Knowledge is the outcome of students' engagement with the world around as they explore, respond, invent, and make meaning of it. Remember, exploring, responding, inventing, this is nothing but making sense of the experiences. So, classroom provides one kind of experience, life outside the classroom gives another kind of experience. People living in the family get yet another kind of experience. All these experiences, the living beings try to make sense of them. And therefore, learning is also governed by a couple of metaphors. Learning is making sense of the experiences. Learning is an exercise in meaning making. And when you combine, whether you make sense of the experiences or you make meaning, that is what is called as construction of knowledge. And please remember, I cannot construct knowledge for you. I cannot make sense of experiences for you. I cannot make meanings for you. I can only make meanings for myself. I can only make sense of my experiences. And therefore, learning is also considered to be a very personal phenomena. And that is where the teacher can only facilitate the self-process. The teacher can facilitate. So, in this view only, NCF 2005 spoke about shift in focus from teaching to learning. Now, the focus is not what the teacher knows, but what the teacher is intending the children to learn. And this is the shift in focus. As a result of this shift in focus, there was a shift in the role of the teacher. Earlier, the teacher was transferring, the teacher was transmitting, and from that, the teacher moved to the role of a facilitator. So this is our context. Now, when it comes to outcome-based education, when it comes to competency-based learning, dear friends, they mean one and the same. Certain nomenclature they use outcome-based education, certain nomenclature they use competency-based learning. These are referring to one and the same, depending on from which school of thought the literature is. Some people would be using OBE, some people could be using CBL. Now, even this OBE CBL also has been notified or categorized or evolved or developed in different forms. For your understanding, I will be sharing with you two different forms. One form is that of NCTM, National Council for Teachers of Mathematics. They have the competencies listed in terms of 5 content standards and 5 process standards. What are the content standards? The content standards are numbers and operations, algebra, geometry, measurement, data analysis, and probability. These are the content. So your entire mathematics content, whether you are dealing in the lower class or dealing in the higher class, you can divide into these 5 different forms or in certain other different forms. Then they also have notified 5 process standards. What are those standards? Problem solving, reasoning and proof, communication, connections, representation. Say that is why problem solving is an essential mathematical skill. Reasoning and proof is also an essential mathematical skill. Communication and finding connections and looking for representations, so that the idea concluded by me is appropriately conveyed to the listeners, is conveyed to the audience, is conveyed to the readers, and therefore representation is also essential. Then I am giving you the second example. Denmark, which is also one of the high performing countries when it comes to PISAs, they also had a project called COMB project, in which they defined competence. To possess a competence in some domain is to master essential aspects of life in that domain. So if I say that I am competent in working with mathematics, whatever is essential aspects that are required to be used in mathematics, I should be having it. Only then I can say that I possess competence in mathematics. Then mathematical competence then means the ability to understand, judge, do and use mathematics in a variety of contexts and situations in which mathematics plays or could play a role. You can understand as teachers of mathematics how in common sense people grossly incorrectly use or describe situations when it comes to mathematical things. So you might have seen, depending on what kind of a view the news editors take, even a marginal variation, they can say there is a sharp fall. Fall and variation, these are all qualitative terms. Say when a 5% change and a 50% change is there, compared to 5% change, only 50% change can be called as a fall. A 5% change can only be called as a minor deviation. It cannot be called as a fall. But then unfortunately, if I want to present the situation in bad light, instead of calling a small change, I can call it a big fall. And such kind of representations are happening day in and day out. And we are simply accepting it for the very simple reason our mathematical competence itself is limited. Then what is a mathematical competency? A mathematical competency then is a clearly recognizable and distinct major constituent of mathematical competence. In other words, a set of mathematical competencies constitute the mathematical competence of an individual. So this is the publication taken from the publication of the Danish COMB project. So you have seen there are 2 different ways, and they have identified 8 different competencies. I'll share this presentation subsequently with you since I joined late, and the speaker also would be ready at 10 in the morning. I don't want to take much of time. I'll leave it to you to read and then understand. Now we can see what the various competencies are. And here, CVL for us, you see, amendment to the Central RTA Rules 2017 includes reference on class-wise, subject-wise learning outcomes. These would serve as a guideline for states to ensure that all children acquire appropriate learning level. You recall what I said when the focus of the policy of the government is on quality, that not only children should be granted admission, but they should also acquire appropriate learning level. And this means that all schools are compulsorily required to follow teaching and learning based on the learning outcomes approach. This is what the CBSE circular number 34/2020 says. And here I would request you to read 3 different documents carefully. One is the learning outcomes at elementary stage published by NCERT in 2017. Second is the Back to Basics materials published by KVS for classes 1 to 8 in 2016, and Alternative Academic Calendar NCA published by NCRT 2020 for the current pandemic situation. So Back to Basics, it has three different things. They are three different columns: concept, competency, or skill as the first column, targeted learning outcome next, and followed by suggested strategies and activities. This is for curricular transaction, planning and transaction. And as you transact, whether the students have learned or not, to understand, some sample learning assessment items are given. These are the this is the design of the Back to Basics thing. Same way, when it comes to learning outcomes, you see, the curricular framework normally speaks about three things. One is that what are the curricular expectations? They refer to the long-term goals. What is the goal in the elementary stage? What is the goal in the primary stage? What is the goal in the upper primary stage? So on and so forth. And learning outcomes are short-term expectations, short-term goals for the particular session, for the particular lesson in that particular subject. So they are defined class-wise, subject-wise, and in order to achieve these outcomes, certain pedagogical processes are suggested. So I request you to read these books with this clear understanding. What are the curricular expectations for the middle school? The curricular expectations of the middle school are the children are now able to move from concrete ideas of numbers to number sense. Say knowing number is one thing and having a sense of numbers is another thing. It's a higher form. Seeing relationship in numbers and look for patterns in relationships. Say the very beautiful example that I can give you is as it is given in one of the in Max books in one of the middle school classes, when the mischievous mathematician was in his school days was to be tied up doing some calculation, and so the teacher asked him to find out the sum of first 100 numbers, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, thinking that the fellow will take more time. But then what did the fellow do? Rather, he located the pattern and he arranged them in pairs: first number, last number, second from last, third number, third from last, and found each pair had the same total. And so total the sum of a pair multiplied by the number of pairs, he got the total. And that's the very famous formula for the sum of first n integers, which is n by 2 times n plus 1. So n by 2 refers to the number of pairs, n plus 1 refers to the sum of a pair. Because the first pair is the first number and the nth number, sum of these two is 1 plus n. But then you see, for a convenient representation, how do we write? We write n into n plus 1 by 2, and with a common line of the 2. So we read the numerator as one entity, denominator as another entity, and in the process, we fail to recognize the relationship, we fail to recognize the pattern here. And the curricular expectation at this stage is children should be able to see and recognize such kind of relationships and patterns. Use arithmetic and algebra to solve real life problems. So these are the curricular expectations. I leave it to you to read. You might be very familiar with, but then it is insufficient for you to read only the curricular expectations in the upper primary. You need to know what is the curricular expectation in the lower primary. You need to know what is the curricular expectation in the secondary, because upper primary is the bridge between the two. And therefore, we need to recognize that this curricular expectation is a continuum, and therefore, if there is a shortfall in the lower stage, we need to build up as teacher. And if the students are to be prepared, they also need to be exposed that you can't stop with this, you can proceed further, proceed higher. Then when it comes to learning outcomes, I have just chosen the learning outcomes listed in that document of NCRT. Some of them, not all, especially for the class 6, solves problems with large numbers by applying appropriate operations, applies LCM or HCF in a particular situation, uses fractions and decimals in different situations. You see, most of our learning, people believe that they don't have any applicability in real life and they are only meant for the classrooms and examinations. But the fact is, we teach all these things in the classrooms and examinations only for the purpose that the children would be able to use these gains in the real life situation. So using fractions and decimals in different situations, solves problems on daily life situations involving operations on numbers and fractions. So these are all the learning outcomes. But then remember, these outcomes are also on a broader context. But then if you have to write learning outcomes for a particular lesson, then you need to understand that they have a set of specific features. What are they? It is written in an ambiguous language. It refers to a behavioral activity. It also indicates a measurable outcome with the desired performance criteria, and they are always linked to teaching and learning methods. Assessment and evaluation are aligned with overall competencies mentioned in the framework developed by NCERT. So therefore, these are the things that we need to take care. When I write the learning outcomes, so next time when you have an inspection, please see you write the learning outcomes involving these: unambiguous language, behavioral activity, measurable outcomes with desired performance criteria, and they are linked to teaching and learning methods. Then the CBSE circular also gives a simple thumb rule for framing learning outcomes, and they have given a simple template, and the template is given like this. So you look into a carefully constructed learning outcome, and that outcome would be fitting into this template only. And therefore, dear friends, before I conclude, you see, after taking part in the program, you would be required to conduct trainings in your regions. So read and think about the concepts, have clarity. We have chosen only 5 themes, rather it's not competencies, 5 themes to demonstrate how competency-based learning can be approached. So work on these to get mastery, work along these lines for other competencies, work along these lines for training other people. I need to have changed this, sorry I didn't do it, since I made some modifications only in the morning, I didn't do it. With this, I once again welcome you to this program and wish you all the very best for the success, and spend another few minutes in responding to any queries or questions that you have. Just to squeeze time, I did not give any option for you to share your thought processes. So I'll give you a few more minutes. So if you have anything, please do ask.
गुड मॉर्निंग सर।
Yes, good
गुड
morning.
मॉर्निंग सर। सर ये जो मटेरियल है हमको सीबीएसई साइट पे मिल जाएगा क्या?
Which one?
ये जो मटेरियल है अभी ट्रेनिंग वगैरह हम कर रहे हैं तो इसका मटेरियल वगैरह सीबीएसई की साइट पे मिलेगा?
हम शेयर करेंगे, हम सब जो भी मटेरियल हम यूज कर रहे हैं ये सब आपके साथ शेयर हो जाएगा।
थैंक यू सर।
Thank you.
Okay, I will be there with you for all the 5 days. So we can also discuss at subsequent points of time as and when you get any issues. So with this, I once again welcome you all to this program and wish you all the very best. Thanks for a very, very patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir, for your kind words. With your permission, let us have a 10 minutes gap to start the next session, sir.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
dear friends, the next session will start at 10:20. Please relax and come back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Ruchi madam, welcome. Sorry, I think we have to wait for 10 more minutes. Yes.
Okay.
I am giving. I
Okay.
think you won't mind it.
Okay. And so the session is supposed to be for 1 hour or 1.5 hours?
You can have up to 11:30. You can take up to
11:30, na? Yeah. Yeah.
11:30.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Because
Thank
then I had some tasks for asynchronous.
And they will come back at 4:30 to present it.
Okay. Fine. Yeah.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you.